the third theme of the day, and welcome to our panel who are going to join me in discussing sustainable trade, seizing new opportunities. And we've had a fabulous conference so far. I'm sure you would agree, with speakers talking at various stages on themes that I think we'll come back to today and cover. But by way of a backdrop to this discussion, it seems clear that developing suitable environmental and societal policies to reduce barriers to trade, to drive growth in the global economy and drive innovation in green industries should have the effect of providing opportunities for growth in new global markets and deliver a successful green economy. But that, of course, will take time and take adaptation. And as we heard so eloquently, I think, earlier from those young women from the Greycoat Hospital School, sustainability in global trade is being increasingly demanded by consumers, by some companies as well as NGOs and government organisations. And it's these issues that I'm sure you recognise framed much of the discussion at both the Paris and Glasgow COP summits. Sustainability considerations are also playing an increasingly prominent role in framing trade policy, including more recently announcements on tariff treatment on goods and supply chain strategy. And global agreements on green trade have also emerged, I think most prominently on the agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability. But there are also other approaches designed to incentivise exports in green goods and associated services. And I think that the response from companies that we'll see in the years ahead is that they will expect much more from their suppliers in regard to those things. The progress theme of today's conference incorporates a range of topics, including sustainable and responsible investment, new developments in the movement of goods at our borders, the digitisation of trade, as well as the environmental challenges and opportunities. But we should also acknowledge the current pressures and demands on often complex global supply chains. And I think that the speeches and the conversation that Mary Robinson and Halle Thomasdottir had, I think, highlighted how we need to be brave, in a sense, about some of the decisions that are made in the short term that can have big long-term impacts and consequences. So turning to our panel now, I want to give each of you the opportunity to make a short introduction and to talk about your business and how that relates and how your organisations are working towards or delivering, indeed, a more sustainable future. And I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. Rebecca Warders, Head of Knowledge Management at Housefeld and Company. You're a solicitor by trade and also in the London Chamber Court of Arbitration and Mediation. So what role does the law have? What role can the law play in driving this sustainable global trade goal?
Thanks, Liam. Well, I think in terms of the legal perspective, if businesses want to sustain global trade and drive growth, then companies that are investing need to have total confidence that they can enter that investment, the investment is going to go as planned, and that the law supports that goal, and that if something goes wrong, that they have recourse to a dispute resolution mechanism that enables them to recover if things don't go quite as planned. And inefficiencies can really arise where there's a lack of confidence, and that can produce a barrier to trade, because if you don't have confidence that if you invest that you're going to be able to enforce your contracts and enforce your rights, and that might be because you don't have confidence in the national court system where you're investing, or it might be because you have confidence in the court system where you're investing, where the court system that you've used in your contracts, but you're not sure whether you can you can actually enforce the judgments from that country in the country where the people you want to enforce against have their assets, then that's obviously a massive barrier to trade, because you need to be 100% confident that when you're going in, if something goes wrong, then you can enforce those rights under your contract. So effective dispute resolution is a lot more vital to trade than it might seem to be at first blush. And it's really vital to avoid those inefficiencies in global business. And luckily, there are a number of practical steps that you can take to provide yourself with the best possible foundation as you grow your own trade. And this really reminds me of an old story, perhaps from pre-sat-nav days. And I would say that this is an old story, but I think most of us have had more recent experiences with our navigation systems. That in the old days, the joke had it that you'd arrive somewhere you didn't know where you were going. And you'd wind your window down and you'd ask a helpful or perhaps unhelpful stranger for directions. And their response would be, oh, well, I wouldn't start from here. And I think that can be the case sometimes with international trade contracts. So when you're at that point where things have gone to plan, that's fine. But if things don't go to plan, that's not the response that you want to be met with when you're trying to resolve your issues. So that's the position we don't want to be in with our contracts. And what can we do about that? So we can start by actually having a good contract, one that's well written and covers the whole deal. And that might sound like very obvious comments for an august audience at a conference like this, but a surprising number of even international deals are done without a formal contract in place. And a lot of contracts don't actually include everything that the parties agreed. So I'd be over-promising if I sat here and said that anyone could deliver you a contract that's litigation-proof. I don't think that any lawyer or the law can deliver that, but it certainly does help avoid disputes down the line if you can cover what I'm going to call the drafting 101. And it can be very easy, I think we've all done it, to have a new deal and reach for the paperwork that we've used before. But I think it requires just taking that moment to look at the paperwork and think, is this really right for this particular deal? Is what I already have here in the standard terms going to work? And we can all get very focused, I think, on papering the exciting transaction that we're putting together and the price and the details of how what we're going to do is going to work. But if you don't have the fundamentals behind you, like having standard terms in terms of an entire agreement clause that makes the contract authoritative, then you don't have those protections in place. And you also want the fundamentals on notice, contract termination, and assignment in place. So on that note, finally, we also want to think about what to do if things go wrong. And hopefully, the vast majority of transactions go smoothly. And that's not something you'll ever need to think about. But this is one of the key points in relation to frictionless trade, that companies need to be confident that they can enforce those legal rights. And they want to, I think, travel knowingly as well as hopefully. So clauses on governing law, dispute resolution, and jurisdiction might not always feel really pressing at the stage when people are making deals, but these aspects can be really decisive to international trade. And anyone dealing internationally in a country where it's not easy to enforce a UK court judgment and where they might want a neutral process will want to consider an arbitration clause where they name a trusted arbitration institution, because it's much easier to enforce an arbitration award than a court judgment using an international convention known as the New York Convention. And I would say that in ensuring you've got an arbitration clause in your contract is a really important step. And obviously we've got Chris from the ICC, which has a very well-known and very well-respected arbitral institution. And before I wind up, as a board member of the London Chamber of Arbitration and Mediation, I'm very happy to be able to mention LCAM at this point, which is an excellent arbitration institution operating as part of the London Chamber of Commerce, and well worth considering including an LCAM clause in contracts, because if you do end up in a dispute and want to resolve it in arbitration, there's a cost-effective process there, fixed fee administration, and competitive arbitrator fees. And we do have model clauses on the LCAM website that are very straightforward to pick up and use.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think that was a Freudian slip at competitor with Chris sitting next to you. But anywho's, it sounds like the message there is it's never too early to call your solicitor and take advice, because the thrill of the deal can indeed be thrilling and can cause people to shortcut. Chris, coming to you, I mean, as Rebecca acknowledged, the ICC is very, very active in that area, but I want to turn to other areas of sustainable trade and the work that the ICC is engaged in that space. Can you talk to us about that? Because in terms of this digital world, you're absolutely at the forefront of those developments for traders.
Yeah, just before I do, I think the point around contracts is really important. When we published the ICC Incoterms, which is the rules for buyers and sellers of goods in 2020, what was really shocking was the discovery that actually how many companies are not using contracts at all, or even terms and conditions. So that's a risk as much as anything else. And the future, by the way, is smart contracts, quite a different way of doing trade. So that contractual framework is super important for digital trade, which I'm going to talk about now. So if anyone who doesn't know the International Chamber of Commerce, we represent 45 million companies in 100 countries. We're a big animal. And we're a part of the chamber family with the British chambers and local chambers. We all work together as the same football team, if you know what I mean, in our different positions. And that's important. It's a team effort. At global level, sustainable, inclusive, and green trade is the #1 priority. And I think Liam's spot on. We are the secretariat for the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Trade and Investment. There we interact with unions, consumers, academics, and actually on sustainable and green trade, it's amazing how much consensus there is. There's no dispute there at all, really. We may have differences of opinion in some of the detail, but on direction of travel, it's super clear, and I thought we saw that at COP. But how do we deliver a sustainable green economy, and how do we do that in an international context right across those global value chains, across multiple jurisdictions? That's the challenge that we have. And to do that, step one as an enabler is to digitize and modernize our trading environment. It is way too antiquated, far too paper heavy. I don't need to tell, I don't think anyone in this room, how much of a pain point that is in the trading system. 4 billion paper documents are floating through the system at any given time. It's expensive, it's inefficient, and actually completely unnecessary. So that's why we're putting so much effort at the moment into making sure that we're removing legal barriers. In the UK, we have the Electronic Trade Documents Bill coming through Parliament starting in July. That will be, we'll be the first G7 economy to remove any requirement to handle commercial trade documents on paper. That's a game changer because 80% of commercial trade documents, particularly bills of lading globally, are all operating on English law. So that will have a tremendous effect globally as well as nationally. But that's super important because we can't really standardize and connect processes and systems, enable those documents or information, I should say, to flow between government and the private sector, the insurers, the ports, the carrier, every stakeholder, the buyer and seller, of course. So, that digital piece is super important, but it's also important in terms of getting the right quality of data. How do we know what trade is sustainable? How do we know which trade we should be financing? Trying to extract that information off paper is, almost impossible in places, and what you do get isn't good enough quality. It's very hard to make it comparable. So that quality of data is super important because that gives us visibility, tells us what trade is sustainable, what should we be incentivizing, where should we be putting effort and resources to make it more sustainable or mitigate those impacts. That transparency, visibility in the global value chain will come through operating with basically smarter use of existing technology. This is not a technology issue. There is plenty of technology in the market. There's plenty of providers in the market. It's simply that the system is so paper heavy. And my sort of call to you today, really, we'll talk a little bit more about it, I'm sure, is we need your help. We've been laying the groundwork, getting those legal barriers removed, getting the standards frameworks into place. That's all pretty much either done or definitely in train. Enormous momentum going, but we need your help to drive demand now. To start the journey, if you haven't started already, start to get familiar with how you handle those transactions in digital form. That starts with small steps to begin with. But there's no question at all this is happening, and it's happening fast, as I'll probably say a little bit later in the session.
And actually, as one of the previous speakers on the stage said earlier, actually a lot of trade is already digital. The private sector is already ready in the developed world. The gaps often are in the less developed countries. They are not ready to receive those documents, and actually we can move fairly quickly in those matters. And that is a good segue to you, Liz, where your world is already digital. That's the place that you inhabit in your business, and I'm sure you're helping lots of people in that journey, businesses in that journey through to digital transformation. So tell me about how your business is growing and where it's growing, and where is the demand side coming from that Chris refers to?
Okay, well, I'll start off by just explaining, because digital transformation is a very big topic, but also it's a strap line, but what does it mean? So my company both uses digital, so we are a digital or mid-sized digital company that works globally. And so digital is democratizing. You can be a small organization and you can have global reach and global business. But also we deliver digital solutions for our clients. So what is digital transformation? The first thing is it joins up people and processes. And it makes those joins interoperable. You can be seamless and work together. Referring back to Chris's point, it makes it more reliable, more predictable, more consistent, more transparent. But what it does do as well is it removes a lot of the manual administration, which is error-prone, because it's a boring job. And those repetitive, boring jobs tend to be more error-prone, even if they're business-critical processes. And from an SME point of view, it makes it more predictable, because a digital process which is automated is not going to have the human errors inside. The second element is data. So the data that's produced as a consequence of whatever process that happened, but also maybe historic data and or projected data. And that's the second level of digital transformation. Processes that are joined up, data that gives you insights and helps you execute those processes. And then the third generation is smart. So what does smart mean? Smart means that you have joined up processes that you can monitor and have oversight on. It also means that you have data that you have greater reliance on, and it then means that you can use some of the more advanced technologies like artificial intelligence to very, very quickly go through massive volumes of data and actually make better decisions. It also means that you can automate stuff that doesn't need human beings. You can elevate the jobs of your people to be far more interesting and customer-focused and outcomes-focused. So that's what digital transformation is, and that's what we do. And we work in the very secure, large and complex space. I'm an export champion for the Department of International Trade, and I'm also part of the Scale Up Institute, because we want international business to be really accessible to small and medium-sized companies. It is no longer the domain of only the largest corporations. It genuinely is a level playing field. Part of that is digital trade. Part of that is having greater access to the resources that historically only large corporations had internally. The modern free trade agreements which are being negotiated now genuinely are democratizing for small and medium-sized businesses. And like us, I would encourage people to look at international business as part of your growth plans, not just domestic business.
Thanks, Liz. Now, it makes me think about our Chamber Customs business, which is a digital-first business where our aim is to have this single source of truth. Typically, the data in relation to a trade across a border exists somewhere in a company's system already, yet the system we operate, even in the UK, involves usually someone keyboard bashing that data with the errors that are inherent in that process, and funnily enough, occasionally the hold-ups at the border as a consequence of getting that wrong. So, digital is really important. We're going to flip a little bit now away from that idea of contracts and digital trade to Sam Jones from Coca-Cola GB, Head of Sustainability, a big company. We all are familiar with it. We probably even admit to consuming it now and again. But you're a big global organisation. So tell us about how you're responding to the challenges of delivering more sustainable, a more sustainable business and more sustainable communities in the areas in which you operate, Sam.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll try.
Small question.
Yeah. How long have you got? I've got 17 minutes to cover that. So there's probably a couple of different areas. So if I start with the top line, so we've a company with our sustainability challenges. Of course, we've got a program called This Is Forward, 6 commitments acting across climate, packaging, water, supply chain, people, and drinks, which for us is sugar largely. And what we're at pains to do is try and understand a couple of things. The first one is we talk about sustainability, sustainable trade, however you want to use the word sustainable. And so you talked about a single source of truth and the importance of data. And that's a really, really critical point, because I think there's still lots of these things are really emerging. We look at some of the big trends on sustainability and things that are getting discussed in GB today, whether it's HFSS or DRS or whatever it might be, climate change, of course. And there can often be contradictions and complexities between we think this is the most sustainable thing for carbon, but it might not be the most sustainable thing for water. What matters most? How do you balance that and how do you trade it off? So getting to that point where we have a single source of truth to understand what do we mean by sustainability and how do we have a kind of level playing field so that the data we have is the same data that our biggest customers have and it's the same data that everybody in this room has. Because at the moment that is not the case. We're dealing with interpretations, with different analyses, with different scopes, different start points and end points. So we are absolutely comparing apples and pears and trying to make informed decisions. And then guess what? Our data is different from our colleagues in France and from Germany. So how we deal with these things at a kind of balanced scorecard is really complicated to work out. And the second thing is how do we as a business kind of trade in the more micro sense, if you like. So we've got tens of thousands of customers up and down the country, different shapes, different sizes. Some are for, it's a can off the shelf, some of it's a multi-pack to go and drink at home. And our customers all have different priorities on sustainability. They've all got their own points of truth as well. So having that sense of alignment with them is absolutely critical. But beneath that, you've then got the shoppers. And so we like many customers, businesses, we don't sell to our shoppers, we sell to our customers and they sell to the person on the street who hopefully drinks and enjoys our tasty beverages at some point in the day. And they've all got their own perceptions of sustainability as well. So there's no single point of truth that they've got. And some of that is based on personal values because they care more about something. Some of it is based on the news or social media or whatever piece of information they've got. And to add another layer of complexity, when we begin to start to understand some of the consumer behaviours and perceptions of the things, their behaviours change depending on the environment that they're in. So you hopefully will recognise the way you behave at work around things like recycling is maybe different from how you behave at home around recycling, which maybe is different again when you've had a takeaway to when you've cooked your own meal, or if you're picking up something from the petrol station. People behave differently depending on where they are, and some of it can relate to their sort of attachment or detachment from the kind of product and the topic at that time. So how we trade and continue to sort of earn that license to trade on that more micro scale around sustainability is, it's fun.
But you're quite, as you've described, you can be quite distant from the eventual consumer or indeed the trader that is selling on your product. But I know we've heard today from a couple of people that have got, technologies. They're using technology in order that they help their businesses or firms to measure their impact on the environment and so on. You do something, I think, called, is it Net Zero Now?
Yeah, so Net Zero Now is a kind of, I'll call it program, platform, whatever phrase you want to use. So we're absolutely conscious that as a bigger business with a better resource sustainability team, we have got to help our customers, and we've got a specific focus since the pandemic on focusing our support on the hospitality sector because it's critical for us. It's gone through a really tough time. It still is. So open, closed. You can get staff, you can't get staff. It's a real nightmare for the sector at the moment. And we did a bit of a kind of round robin of some of our customers in the sector top end of 2021 and said, we know you're struggling, when we know you're grappling with climate as a specific topic. And despite everything that happened with COVID, 91% of our hospitality customers came and said, we just need help on climate. We're going to have to do something in the next 3 years, but quite honestly, we haven't got a clue what to do. Where do we start? And so 71% said, it would be really helpful if there was a kind of certification scheme. So to get to that point of standard, single points of truth, consistency in ways of working. So we've built with a couple of other partners, the Sustainable Restaurant Association and Pernod Ricard, I think it's quite simple to use. I'm probably slightly biased. Certification scheme, online tools, just stick your data in. You can make it as personalized or as kind of simplified as you like. And then you get a nice bespoke action plan out the back end. And then you can do things, you save money at the same time if you do them well and right. And crucially, and the thing that really mattered to our customers was we're then helping them with communications, and just like your kind of Just Eat stickers or your your hygiene ratings, lots of POS in the shop windows and stuff. Because what they're telling us anecdotally is that's helping them to recruit and then crucially retain staff.
Something we've spoken about more than once in this conference today is actually people who want to be employed by businesses who are clear about their goals in terms of global impact and sustainability. So that's helping the traders down the supply chain to understand that. And what kind of action plan would somebody have? What would be an example of an action that someone might take?
Well, yeah, two from two different areas. The single biggest one that usually comes out is maybe just take a little bit of beef off the menu.
Okay.
You know, maybe something else, replace it with a vegetarian or a vegan option, because that's typically the biggest driver of foot carbon in hospitality. And the second one is there's a surprising number of the businesses just didn't have a good, clear idea on things like their energy costs and the lighting they were using, the level of insulation. They've got some really quite simple, practical things, which at the moment is really important for them.
So not only reaches those goals, but probably makes them more competitive and lowers their cost base as well, and that's a clear advantage. And some of the data that we're talking about here, this is big data as well, Liz. I mean, you know, what are the other practical things that you have seen and you've experienced? And we talked about alignment there in this single source of truth, but you're a company that's UK based, but you also have exported your business to other markets.
Well, we have Australia as well as the UK.
Australia. So when you set up in Australia, what were the challenges you faced there? Was there good, clear alignment? Was there this single source of truth? Or what challenges do you face as an exporter into another market?
Well, I think some of the points Rebecca referenced, you know, there can be different rules of law. You can have different standards, and you need to map them so that you need to understand, you know, you might be compliant in this jurisdiction, but you know, the standards might be slightly different. But again, modern free trade agreements are now looking at harmonisation of standards. So a little bit of sort of research will help you, you know, sort of smooth the way. You know, set up a bank account. I mean, it would be great for the finance sector to play catch up. If there's anybody out there, you know, make the time to set up a bank account so that you can do business. There's nothing more frustrating than literally having a client ready to sign on the dotted line, and you can't transact with them. If you're going to do international business, again, transfer pricing agreements between two related parties, like our company in the UK and our company in Australia, little things like that. Again, a bit of legal advice will help you navigate through the taxation office or inland revenue. And culture, I mean, the one thing about scaling companies is how do you stay connected in culture? And again, digital can be an enabler for that. It's not a substitute for a relationship. You still need to make the effort to get together in person. But it really does facilitate the better working. I mean, we have a global digital backbone. We're strategic partners with both Amazon Web Services and Microsoft, and we're in the global marketplace. Again, a mid-sized company that can play on that field, and it's all enabled by digital.
You know, but those are the challenges. So some things are enabled, some things are still a bit clunky. And I'm going to come to the audience, to you in a moment, just to maybe take the time to take a couple of questions if we have them. But Rebecca, we talked here about the banks and Liz saying the banks need to catch up. Are we seeing the end of the wet stamp, wet signed contracts, or is there some way to go on that yet?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think it depends probably where you're sitting. And I think we're quite fortunate, and I think you already mentioned, Chris, Bill, that's going through at the moment. And obviously in the UK, I think it's fair to say that we have been a very digitally minded country, and the lawyers across the UK have worked very, very hard to move away from wet signatures, and the Law Society's done a lot of work in terms of digital signing. That's fantastic. But we talked about how you go to another country and you find that, of course, there are different protocols on the banking side and on the tax side. And the same is entirely true of digital operations and signing digitally. And I think there are certain countries that I'm aware of where, at the moment, if you are entering a contract and you want it to be enforceable in that country's legal process, then you do need a wet signature. And there are still countries where not only do you need a wet signature, where you also need, a lot of countries still have each company having an assigned stamp, and you not only need the signature, but you need the stamp. And so I think we're not kissing goodbye to the days of having to sign in person or around a table, but we're certainly moving away from it. And in this country, we've done great strides.
More than most, but there's still a way to go.
As discussed, we've got the bill moving through, and I think we do need to fully embrace digital signatures and digitalisation.
Much more secure apart from anything else. Chris, I just want to come to you just briefly on something that you've launched recently, which is the Centre for Digital Trade Innovation, of which BCC are partners on that development. Why do we need such a thing in the UK? What is it going to do, and how is it going to help traders to?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Dan. I mean, I think, well, it's coming up in the conversation here. You know, you can't do this stuff unless we're working across industry, across government, and most importantly, internationally. This is an international, activity, really. Otherwise, it's a bit, as I always kind of keep saying, it's a bit like building a motorway into a brick wall. The moment you cross that border, and then somebody says you have to print that, collective groan, what was that all about? We have to work with our partners so that we're all working together, whether it's setting standards, whether it's creating rules. And don't forget, this stuff is new. Climate, sustainability, we've got the biodiversity agreement coming in China this year. This is big stuff, but it's not going away. So we've got to create the rules and frameworks for us to operate. Now, the centre is important because in the digital environment, you can't digitise and accelerate UK trade without some sort of mechanism that brings us all together. There's loads of initiatives going on, but those are great, nothing wrong with them, but they're not the sum of their parts unless we can align, we adopt the same standards. So we now have a WTO ICC standards toolkit. That's the equivalent of Apple and Microsoft sitting down and saying, right, we're now using the same standards so that our documents and information can flow. We have that this year, and that's an absolute game changer because it now means that we can connect our systems, government to business. The Centre's job, really, is to be a sort of focal point where it brings industry and government around the table. We've got 4 government departments behind the Centre. That's the first, and we're the sort of convener, if you like, the neutral convener to create that neutral forum for us to do that. Secondly, to make sure we have a consistent approach, that we're all adopting the same standards, and those standards are the same standards that every other country is adopting. And then we have the capability to run pilots and test systems, so we're just about to launch pilots with Singapore to make sure that everybody is using the right systems, those systems are talking to each other, the documents are flowing in digital form, but also run training for SMEs so that everyone understands what solutions are out there, how do we help you, practical things. And then we're also going to be running campaigns on digital identities. We know 96% of the UK trading community are not using digital identities, but we also know that digital identities are absolutely crucial in getting that transparency and visibility and traceability through those global value chains.
Interoperability.
And interoperability.
Liz, you wanted to come in there?
I would also make the suggestion that even if the other trading nation isn't fully digital, you can do the last mile. Let's just say the last mile is a wet signature and the company stamp. You can still do 90% of the journey digitally and do that last mile in the traditional way until that particular nation catches up. But because that's the way to make progress, isn't it? It's not just a black and white situation.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, I often get asked, when is this going to happen? Well, it's happening, and it's happening fast. I think that's important in the context of trade, which is very slow. But the reality is we're going to be working in a mixed economy here, right? So some countries we're going to be a bit of digital, a bit of paper for a long time. Let's be honest, 188 countries don't accept commercial documents in digital form. That's a lot. But that number is reducing, and it's reducing quickly. And we'll get to a tipping point. And then there'll be big corridors where you can just be fully digital. And so it's about exploiting those corridors as best you can to bring down that trade cost, because we know we can slash trade costs 80% when we do this. It's big.
Can I just stop you there, because I do want to see if we've got any questions from the audience. We've got a lady with a pink jacket right in front of us here. If we can get a microphone to you. Jenny's just in the way. Well, we've got 2 people converging on you, actually. Anyone else? So we can maybe do 2 at a time. And the gentleman just behind here with his hand up, Marika. Thank you. First, your question.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if you also foresee that SPS requirements, the phytosanitary requirements, will be digitalized soon, because that would be, for a lot of Dutch companies, a huge difference.
Thank you. We'll come to that, and if we could take your question as well.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the harmonisation of standards, and the UK government seem to want to create their own product standards away from the CE mark. And I wonder whether you see that as an opportunity or as a disadvantage to future trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a bit of a ruling on that just recently on at CE marks and an easement that the government did announce for UK-based firms to be able to combine both the CE mark and the UK mark. Does anyone want to come to that? Or?
Yeah, I can touch on it.
Because if you can touch on that, and then perhaps I'm thinking of this panel, maybe I'm the SPS person.
I can touch on SPS.
Yeah. Well, carry on.
Well, I think first question, SPS, yes. The answer is yes. It's definitely on the hit list, that's for sure. Yeah. But we do also recognise it's quite complex, but it's on the hit list. It will go digital, no question about it. It's definitely a big part of
and it's part of the Border 2025 strategy at the UK.
Yeah, and it's also, don't forget, we've got this horrible kind of IPC phytosanitary hub project at the FAO, horrible name. But actually, that's the global, interlocutor on digitising all of it. So, what we're doing in the UK is connected to a global initiative to do exactly that. So it's 100% going to happen. Just got to be patient.
30 seconds.
Yeah. On the standards piece, really important here. That's a good point. We've got to separate technical standards from what I'm calling interoperable digital standards. We're talking about, trade transactional standards. So bills of lading, that documentation piece, particularly because it's a real pain point. It's super important that governments are working with us and we're all adopting the same standards on the interoperability. That's super important. There is a terrible risk that governments are diverging and then we're creating a solution over here and then a problem over there. So we've got to have alignment. We've got to work with the UK government to encourage them, whatever they do, to maintain alignment. That's super important, or we're just storing up a problem for down the road.
We are indeed, and I don't want to diverge from the plan and the programme for today. With 5 seconds to go, please join me in thanking our panel and their contribution this afternoon.